Welcome to our Wednesday night lesson. Hope you're doing well. I hope this video finds you blessed more than you can possibly imagine. I want to thank you for your prayers for those in our church who are sick and those who have tested positive with COVID. Thankfully, this run has, for many of them, not been as rough as last year's situation or last year's case. And so thank you for that. Thank you for your prayers for my wife. As many of you know, she tested positive earlier on in the week, and she's doing much better and up and about and kind of biting at the bit to get back at life. And so she does not like being down very long. So anyways, thank you for your prayers on that, and thank you for your understanding. We've paused services for 2 weeks. That was starting last Sunday. So this Wednesday night will be online. Next Sunday, we'll meet for the two earlier services, the 8:30 and the 11 o'clock hour. That is the two main worship services, the 8:30 and the 11 o'clock. No Sunday school, no evening service. And then again, Wednesday, I'll be online here. And then after that, we'll go back to it, Lord willing, as long as everybody's doing well. And so just again, thanking you for your prayers and for your concern in that and for your willingness to be understanding, flexible. So, hey, listen, I know that this is going to be new to some of you, to a lot of you. We've been on Wednesday nights doing a series. It's not my series. It's one that I have borrowed. There is nothing new under the sun, but there's one that I borrowed from a man by the name of, he's a pastor. He pastors a church, a Bible church up in California, over in California. His name is Timothy Peck, and he did a series called Managing Your Emotions. And as I've told our church and joked around with them, emotions are something that we all deal with, right? We all have them, we all express them. And so I really look forward to what God's going to do with this series. Now, last week was part one of dealing with managing our fear in life. And if you're like me, we struggle with that. That's something that every one of us struggles with. And so what I'm going to do, and I'm sorry for those that were here last week, I'll just kind of give an abbreviated catch up for those that weren't here and didn't hear it, so that you'll kind of know where we're coming from, where we're at. Okay. The truth being told, we do all struggle with fear. All right. I always kind of grin a little bit and laugh or chuckle anytime someone says, I never get afraid. Well, the fact of the matter is they probably haven't found the right thing to deal with in life to make them afraid. Our fears change from when we're kids to the boogeyman, right? That used to be that what's under the bed, what's in the closet, things of that nature, to when you grow older, well, is my health going to stand strong? Is my spouse's health going to be okay? Right now we're praying for some dear friends of ours, the Roten family, over close to they live in the suburbs of Oklahoma City. Christy is struggling with cancer right now, and so we're asking prayers there, and they've asked for prayers, and so we're praying for them. The older we get, the more we have to deal with these type of illnesses and these types of things, and they can become fears. We get scared for our children as they grow up. I don't know about you, but as a dad of kids who are 22, 20, and 18, and 14, we always, it just seems like there's always something that we're concerned about when it comes to our kiddos. A Gallup poll was taken a few years back, and it found that 51% of people, the top fear for 51% of the people was snakes. Snakes. And I can understand, because I'm in that 51%. You can add me to the list. Believe it or not, right underneath snakes there, 40% happens to be the fear of public speaking. I've had to overcome that. I still, every once in a while, if I'm in a new place or something, speaking to people, I can still struggle a little bit with it, but I've thankfully been able to, by God's grace, overcome that fear, but not the snake fear, okay? Haven't done that. In fact, they have said that people are more scared of speaking in public than even of dying. And so what that says, as you've heard me say it before, is that I would rather die than speak to someone in public or speak in front of a crowd. Okay, and so that puts it in perspective, doesn't it? 37% said they had a fear of heights. 34, a fear of being closed in small spaces. 27, fear of spiders and insects. 21, fear of needles and getting shots. 20, fear of mice. 18%, fear of flying on aircraft. I'm curious what your fears might be. So if you're listening to this, if you're paying attention to this, write in on our Facebook site there, on our comments site. What are you afraid of? I'm just curious. I'm looking for some interesting ones. Okay, so let's not make it up, but let's be unique here. So I want to hear some interesting fears, and I've heard some in the past. I won't give it away, but I have heard a few. Nonetheless, more than any other emotion that we experience in life, fear is truly linked to our brain and our nervous system. You ever notice that when you get scared, certain things happen within your body? Your hands may get a little sweaty if you're fearful of heights. A roller coaster. I know for me, if I'm waiting in line, that's why I hate roller coasters. If I'm waiting in line for 45 minutes, my hands are sweating, my heart is racing, maybe feel a little dizzy if you step too close to the edge of a building or a balcony or something like that. And so it's all connected there, isn't it? It's an interesting thing. Neurobiologists, by the way, and I found this interesting, have identified two separate pathways for these fear responses to travel in our brains, and they do make a difference. I want you to catch this. I'm not going to give you all the medical jargon and stuff, but one's considered the short pathway. In other words, what happens is it runs from the thalamus in our brain. That response runs from the thalamus in our brain directly to the amygdala. That's the short, quick response. We don't even think about it. We don't have time to think about it. We just respond. We react. Okay, that's why when someone jumps out from behind a corner, one of your kids thinking they're going to be funny, and they jump out from behind the corner and they scare you, and you just react. You throw up whatever you had in your hands, and you scream out or something along those lines, right? But there's a longer pathway that takes just a split second longer, and what happens is when that response hits, it goes from the oh gosh, I lost my place here in my notes. I'm sorry. It goes from the thalamus to the cortex and then to the amygdala. I wanted to make sure I got that straight because somebody that's going to be watching this, I know, will correct me on that, and I don't want to get that wrong. So it goes from the thalamus to the cortex, then to the amygdala, and it just takes a split second longer. So what that does is in that amount of time, your brain evaluates whether or not this is a legit threat or not. It gives you just enough pause to consider that. Case in point, true story. I shared this with our church last Wednesday. This true example, true story, a woman in Arkansas sitting in her car after shopping when she heard a loud bang and felt a sharp pain in the back of her head. As she was holding her hands behind her head, a passerby stopped. They saw what she was doing. They stopped and asked if she was okay. And she said, "I've been shot in the head and I'm holding in my brains." True story. She responded from the short path that bypasses the cortex. It was just an immediate response. The truth was, what had happened is actually kind of funny. In reality, what had happened is the heat in the car and of the day caused a biscuit canister to explode in the backseat, creating a loud explosion as it shot biscuit dough into the back of her head. Only after the cortex kicked in could she evaluate the false alarm. Did she realize and recognize it? It's not my brains, it's biscuit dough. Now, we laugh at that, but think about how many times we've been caught off guard or had something happen in our life that we weren't expecting, and we have that short pathway response. Now, all of that to say this, we do experience fear in some form or fashion, don't we? We're going to read here a passage. Let's start in Psalm 55 if we could, and talk about fear and about someone who also struggled, had to deal with it too. He was a mighty man. He was a man after God's own heart, in fact. He wasn't a wimp by any stretch of the imagination. This guy was a warrior. He was a king. He had faced down a giant. So I don't think that anybody that would do that could be called a wimp or a coward. And it's David, as you know. Psalm 55, he writes, "Give ear to my prayer, O God, and hide not thyself from my supplication. Attend unto me and hear me. I mourn in my complaint and make a noise because of the voice of my enemy, because of the oppression of the wicked. For they cast iniquity upon me, and in thy wrath they hate me. My heart is sore pained within me, and the terrors of death are fallen upon me." Do you feel the fear here that he's dealing with? "Fearfulness and trembling are come upon me, and horror have overwhelmed me," he said. Wow. This is a very real thing. This is a universal thing that people deal with, right? You see, as the notes would share with us, as Timothy Peck had wrote down and shared, almost every Hebrew word for fear occurs in the first 5 verses of that Psalms. The first form of fear happens to mention, that it mentions, is that of troubling thoughts, right? The issue that we often deal with, which is, what if? We obsess over the what ifs. And we get so wrapped up, our mind gets so wrapped up around what ifs that it just pushes us further into this dark room, if you will, of fear. And we struggle with it even more. What if this happens? What if that happens? What if this takes place? What if that takes place? Until pretty soon we've got ourselves worked up into a tizzy, as my grandmother used to say. So much so that we're not thinking straight. What we're occupied with is the what ifs, the wrong thinking. Right? What if this? What if that? He said, fearfulness and trembling are come upon me. My heart is sore pained within me. Fearfulness and trembling are come upon me. Horror has overwhelmed me. Now, I promise you this, God was no less faithful to David at the beginning of his career than he was at the end of his life, right? At the beginning of his life versus the end. God has always been faithful to David. He's always faithful to us. David was just facing a very difficult time in his life, and we'll get to that in a second. Nonetheless, we got to understand that this is, first and foremost, a real deal. The what ifs in life, right? When we're afraid, we often dwell on the possibilities. What could happen? We also find that we want to run, we want to fight, or distrust others. That's the point we want to make here. The first point is that we dwell on the possibilities. We want to run, we want to fight, or we end up distrusting others. You see, when we're afraid, we also want to run. Neurobiologists kind of had called this the fight or flight syndrome. It's that reaction in our brains that that prepares us to either run or defend ourselves. And it's a very real thing. I believe it's built in by God himself, because there are times we need to get out of the situation, right? There are times you don't want to stand in the middle of the road and say, hey, I'm not scared of that big Mack truck running my way. That's silly. That's crazy. Come on. Right? And so the fight or flight syndrome kicks in, and we need to get out of the way, right? Someone points a gun at you. You want to get out of the way of that. Or there are times when it kicks in that we need to fight. We need to defend ourselves or our family. It could be the same situation, somebody pointing a gun at you or somebody trying to harm you or your family. And that kicks in inside of us, that instinct, right? David the psalmist, look at what he said. I think he deals with this to a degree, because look at what's said in Psalm 55:6. He said, oh, that I had wings like a dove, for then I would fly away and be at rest. Lo, then I would wander far off and remain in the wilderness Selah. You know, how often have you felt like that, right? If I could just get out of this situation. Boy, if I could just run away. That'd be great, wouldn't it? And boy, I got to tell you, folks, there's times in my life I felt the same way. If I could just run as far away from here as possible, I'd be okay, right? But God doesn't always allow that to happen. The third option there that we see, first, the what ifs, right, that we deal with when we're afraid. The second is that sometimes that desire to run away. And the third, when we're afraid, we also at times want to fight. I think you see this in what David says when he prays this to the Lord. He said, let death seize upon them. Let them go down quick into hell, for wickedness is in their dwellings and among them. He prays this very real prayer, honestly. And you say, well, wait a minute, aren't we supposed to pray for our enemies? Yes, and that's what he's doing. A little different. And some would say, well, I got a problem with that. Can I just tell you this? David is being very real about his concerns. And let's be honest, he's taking that concern to where he needs to take it, to the one who can do something right about it. Okay? If he were to respond to this, if he were to take out this action of his feelings, his emotions, and allow it to push him into action for himself to do something about it, then it may very well be that he would act out in a way that was ungodly or not right. So he's taking this to the Lord. No matter where you fall on this issue, he is taking his feelings to the Lord, and he's saying, God, I want you to handle this. I want you to deal with this, right? So in a sense, this is the fight aspect, okay? And very true and very real thing that we have at times. It's not always wrong to defend ourselves. In fact, I don't think it's ever wrong to necessarily defend yourself. It is wrong to bully people and to pick on folks. I know that, but as far as defending yourself, it's certainly not wrong. But this is a particular prayer where he's saying, Lord, deal with these people. And I gotta tell you, there's been times I've prayed that prayer. Maybe you have as well. God, I want to see them redeemed. I want to see them living for you. But Man, right now they're inflicting all kinds of hurt in my life. I'm praying, God, that you would get their attention. And certainly with that, we need to be willing to pray, Lord, change my heart. If it's in the wrong, if my prayer is wrong here, if I'm more interested in payback, if I'm more interested in revenge on this person, cleanse my heart and change it. The fourth thing that we see here that fear can often do, the fourth response, is that when we're afraid, we can become distrusting. What many believe that David is referring to in this circumstance and situation happens to be possibly when his son Absalom turned his back on him. In fact, either talking about Absalom directly or talking about his one-time friend and counselor Ahithophel turning and following Absalom in this rebellion. So David's older now. David's made some mistakes. He's had a lot of victories, but he's made a few mistakes. And one of them is how he handled family issues, right? And so this happens to be something that stems from an old wound from long ago we won't get into right now, but nonetheless, Absalom has rebelled. Now listen to what David said, Psalm 55:9. Destroy, O Lord, and divide their tongues, for I have seen violence and strife in the city. Day and night they go about it upon the walls thereof. Mischief also and sorrow are also in the midst of it. This may be at that point where he leaves Jerusalem because he doesn't want to see fighting take place there. Wickedness is in the midst thereof. Deceit and guile depart not from her streets. For it was not an enemy that reproached me. Then could I have borne it. Neither was it he that hated me, that did magnify himself against me. I could have hid myself from him. He said, but it was thou, a man my equal, my guide, my acquaintance. We took sweet counsel together. We walked into the house of God in company. How sad, right? He's saying, look, this is someone that I cared about. This was someone close to me. I'm going to tell you this, and this is truth. The hurts that are going to be the deepest and the most painful are going to be caused by those who are the closest to us, right? Somebody that hurts us that we don't even know about. I mean, it may still hurt, but it's not going to mean what it does to have someone like a son or a daughter or a mom or a dad or a friend, a coworker, almost someone that a fellow church member. That stabs you in the back or that hurts you. Those are the wounds that are the deepest often. Well, in saying this, right, you get this feeling that, the whole world's turning against David. And I'm sure it felt like that. Fear can cause a lot of mistrust. Well, this person turned their back on me. So what about these other people? What are they saying in the corner over there while they're whispering? I know they're talking about me, right? I've known a lot of folks like that. And there's times that I've thought that, well, they must be saying something about me, right? We think in our mind. And by the way, that's a trick of the devil. We think everybody's talking about us. We think everybody's got it in for us until pretty soon we've convinced ourselves of that. And we're just miserable. We've taken our fear and we've allowed it just to balloon up to the point that it almost pops. Well, listen, I want to remind you right now of a passage in 2 Timothy 1:7, one of my favorite passages where Paul tells Timothy, a man who I think struggled with fear to a degree, he said, listen, young man, we're not given the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. That is the spirit that we are given as children of God, Christian. Power, love, and a sound mind, not the spirit of fear. Right? So we need to be careful about allowing fear to run rampant in our life. Can God use it to get our attention about something? Yes, certainly He can. Right? I have a rightful fear of poisonous, all kinds of snakes, actually. That can be a little irrational at times. But I'm not wild about poisonous snakes. And so there's an inborn thing inside of us that says, hey, don't reach out and pet that thing, right? I saw a guy on TV once give a kiss on the nose of a cobra. It's great. It's nuts. Have at it, buddy. Like people that stick their mouths inside of the head of crocodiles or alligators stick their heads inside of the mouth of a crocodile. Reverse that or listen to that backwards and maybe it'll make better sense. Anyways, those are crazy things, right? And so fear ought to kick in there, that right amount of fear to say, hey, don't do that. That's silly. Come on. But to live a life that is characterized by fear, that's not what God would have for us. To say, as David did in a sense, that, my heart is taken over with fearfulness and trembling. It's come upon me. God doesn't want us living in that state, Christian. That's not for us. That's not what his desire is for our life. And so let me just point you to another point here in our last point tonight. How do we deal with this, right? Where do we go when we find that our life is being overcome with fear in our heart and our mind? Well, I want you to know we find peace when we surrender what we cannot control to God Almighty. We find peace ultimately when we're willing to surrender what we cannot control to God Almighty. And if you'll look in your life and think about all the things that we try to control in life, you're going to find that very few of them can you, if any, can you really truly control. Let's see what David did here and how he handled it. See, number one, David tried to connect with God by calling out to him. That's good, right? That's definitely good. He said in verse 16, "As for me, I will call upon God, and the Lord shall save me. Evening, morning, at noon, I will pray and cry aloud, and he shall hear my voice. He hath delivered my soul in peace from the battle that was against me, for there were many with me." He said evening, morning, and noon, 3 times a day I did it. I did it any chance I could. I cried out to God. Now let me ask you something. Does that mean that God is always going to deliver us from that fear or from that scenario that's causing fear? No. In fact, many times he delivers us through the scenario. But I will tell you what the benefit is of praying that and praying that much. It is knowing the grace that God gives to us. Paul prayed 3 times that God would remove a thorn in his side. Now, I know maybe it was a fear, maybe it wasn't, maybe it was a health issue. I don't know. But he prayed 3 times that God would remove this thorn from his side. And here's what God told him. He said, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my strength is made perfect in weakness." So God said, "No, I'm not going to do that, Paul. But here's what I am going to do. I'm going to show you that my grace is enough. In fact, in your weakness, you're going to find that then and only then are you truly strong." And so God said no, that he could show him true strength. And I think there are times God isn't going to always remove that fearful situation, but what he will do is give you the strength to make it through it, right? And the peace of heart, the peace of mind. Moving on here, verse 22 reminds us of something very important, I think, that we need to point out. In Psalm 55:22, he said, "Cast thy burden upon the Lord, and he shall sustain thee. He shall never suffer the righteous to be moved." Peter echoes that same thing in 1 Peter chapter 5 and verse 7. He said, look, give it over to the Lord. You know, you're going to find that all of us have a circle of concern in our life, okay? We all do, right? The first thing David does is he cries out to God. But there's something else that he does that we need to look at, okay? And let's get back to that circle. I'm sorry, I'm jumping around here a little bit. But the circle of concern, right? This was a concern for David. All of us have a circle of concern in our lives. Your circle of concern represents the people and the situations that you're concerned about today. You got things like that in your life? We all do, don't we? It might be your finances, it might be your health, it might be relationships, it might be your job, it might be your marriage, it might be your children. I don't know. It might be a lot of things. There are a lot of things that can cause us to worry, right? A ton of things. But inside that circle of concern is a smaller circle. A man by the name of Stephen Covey, some of you have read him. He's kind of a leadership guy, time management guy, writes a lot of books about that. He calls this the circle of influence. So we've got the circle of concern, things we're concerned about, but within that is the circle of influence. These are the things in our circle of concern that we can actually have some sort of control over. For instance, you know you've got a test coming up on Wednesday for school. Sorry to run your day. And that circle of influence says, that's within that circle of influence. And so you can do something about it. You say, what is that? I can study. Right? And I can pray a lot about it, but I can also study and prepare myself, prepare my mind. But once Wednesday comes and goes, it moves out of that circle of influence. You can't do anything about it anymore, right? Why are you still worrying about it? It's done. You learn from it, good or bad, and you move on, right? It's done, right? So in verse 22, what we see here is David is doing something. It urges us, verse 22, urges us to focus our energy on something that you and I have control over, okay? And I told you just a second ago, or a minute ago, that there's a lot of things that we don't have control over. In reality, that is true. I don't have a lot of control over my health. I can eat healthy and try to take care of myself. I do some of that. But you know what? I can also step on a street in front of a busy street in front of a bus, and that be it, right? Healthy people die all the time, folks. And so there's a lot that we don't have control over. What do we do with that? We do have control over one thing that's the most important thing, and that is turning the control of our life and over our worries and everything else over to the Lord. I'm going to read it again. Psalm 55:22. The fear of man, or excuse me, wrong verse. Cast thy burden upon the Lord, and he shall sustain thee. He shall never suffer the righteous to be moved. Okay? That's what we have control over. I can give this to the Lord. I don't have to carry it myself. I don't have to keep on clinging to this. I can give it to the Lord. You see, his circle of influence is actually greater, or as great, if not greater, than our circle of concern. Does that make sense? It just blows it out of the water, because what God can do is not what we can do, or excuse me, is more than what we can do, right? We are very limited, very, very finite. He is infinite. There is nothing that is outside of the realm of possibility with our Heavenly Father, right? Scripture tells us that. He has the power to intervene in any circumstance that we face. In fact, let's look at verses 19 through 23 of Psalm. He goes on to say, Psalm 55:19, God shall hear and afflict them, even he that abideth of old. Selah, because they have no changes. Therefore they fear not God. He hath put forth his hand against such as be at peace with him. He hath broken his covenant. The words of his mouth were smoother than butter. He's talking about this quote unquote friend, but war was in his heart. His words were softer than oil, yet they were drawn swords. Cast thy burden upon the Lord. He shall sustain thee. He shall never suffer the righteous to be moved. But thou, Lord, or thou, O God, shalt bring them down into the pit of destruction. Bloody and deceitful men shall not live out half their days, but I will trust in thee. He said, I will trust in thee. You say, what does verse 19 tell us that God is capable of doing? Well, he can hear, right? He hears our prayers. Folks, even though sometimes it seems like he doesn't, or that he hasn't heard them, he has. He hears our prayers. And second, he goes on to say he is able to afflict. That means to abase or to humble those who are moving against us. God has the ability to do that, my friend, and he can. And I've seen at times when he does. It's not always in our timing. It'll always be in his timing, right? And then if you jump on down to verse 23, you can say it like this. God will ultimately repay. He said, vengeance is mine. I will repay, saith the Lord. And that's the best hands to be in when you're talking about repaying someone for something bad that's happened to you, right? And so when you understand it like that, okay, when you understand that it's an issue of control, then I need to turn over that control to the Lord, because I can't control these things. The what ifs and all of that other stuff, I can't handle it. I need to cry out to God. I need to recognize that I can't control this issue, and I need to give it to the Lord. And that's where the last point comes in, faith. I need to have faith in what God can do. You see, Psalm 55 ends by saying, but as for me, I trust in you, God. I trust in you. When it comes down to it, that's what it's all about, isn't it? I trust in you, Lord. I know you can take care of this. I know you can fix this. It's not beyond you. You know, one of my favorite passages is Psalm 121. The psalmist said, I will lift up mine eyes unto the hills, from whence cometh my help. My help cometh from the Lord, which made heaven and the earth. He will not suffer thy foot to be moved. He that keepeth thee shall not slumber. Behold, he that keepeth Israel shall neither slumber nor sleep. Lord is thy keeper. Lord is thy shade upon thy right hand. The sun shall not smite thee by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord shall preserve thee from all evil. He shall preserve thy soul. The Lord shall preserve thy going out and thy coming in from this time forth, even forevermore. My friends, that is his promise to us. He'll never leave you nor forsake you. There is no fear that we face in this life that he does not care about and that he cannot take care of. Are you willing to trust him in that? I hope you are. No matter what it is you're struggling with, I hope you will. Now let me know what some of those fears are. I'd like to hear about them so that I can pray for you as well in that. I've already shared a couple of mine with you. But hey, listen, I hope you have a great day. Great evening. Be in prayer again for the church body. Hope I'll see you this Saturday, or Sunday, Sunday at 8:30 and then at 11 o'clock if you're able to, if you're not sick and down right now. So God bless you. We love you, and may the Lord walk with you. Take care.